first question that most people who come to us ask is, do I have a claim?
Never delay anything because, records can go missing, people can move on who you may need evidence from.
The great benefit of no-win, no-fee agreements is that it does enable anybody to really have the opportunity to get those questions answered and to have their case investigated.
Working out with your experts exactly what of that they would have needed anyway and what of that they wouldn't have needed, and that's the portion that you claim compensation for.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Medical Negligence Matters. Today we're going to be trying to answer that question, do I have a claim? And joining me is my good friend and colleague, Tami Frankel. Hello, Tami.
Hi.
So the first question that most people who come to us ask is, do I have a claim? And so how do we go about answering that? It's not straightforward, is it? It's not a question that has an easy answer.
No, and it's not a question we can really answer on day one. I often say to people, we think there's a question there that needs to be answered. We see an issue that needs to be answered. And then you more have to explain to them the process of how we're going to investigate and get to the answer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I suppose that going back to basics, I guess the things really are that there's three hurdles that we have to get over, aren't there, really? I mean, the first is that you have to show a breach of duty.
Yeah.
And what do we mean by that? Well, obviously, all doctors owe a duty to the people that they're treating. But the first basis of a claim is to show that somehow that duty has been breached. Isn't that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's not always easy because, of course, just because a doctor did something or failed to do something which in retrospect turns out to have caused harm or not been the right treatment for that client doesn't mean they've breached their duty to them. And sometimes that's the most difficult thing in real life to explain to a client. Yes, we know now that had things been done differently, your outcome would have been different. But no, the person who advised you or chose that option hasn't breached their duty.
Was behaving reasonably and was in accord with their duty.
Yeah.
But I guess sometimes the more difficult thing for people to understand is that even if you can establish that breach of duty, that doesn't neccerily win your claim. That's just the first hurdle. And the second hurdle is what with lawyers we call causation, isn't it? I mean, so we have to show that the breach of duty that we've identified directly caused
the harm that has come to them. Because, of course, things can go wrong without it. Somebody can breach their duty of care to a patient and the patient can suffer some sort of harm or not have the outcome they would have hoped. But the two are not related at all. It could be a continuation of the disease process, something that was going to happen anyway. And that is difficult for people to understand, especially when you say to them, yes, we agree, our expert agrees, the doctor did something wrong and you have had a poor outcome, but the two are not related. And I'm really sorry. That means your claim ends here.
I think that is probably one of the most difficult ways to lose a claim, isn't it, really? Is that, yes, something went wrong, but what happened to you would have happened in any event.
Yeah.
You know, of course, for some people that can be a relief or a comfort.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So I suppose that's the second hurdle. And then the third thing is that you need to establish exactly the extent of the injury, don't you? And as you say, distinguishing between what would have happened anyway because of the underlying disease or illness, whatever it was, and what has happened as a result of the negligence, it can be quite a complex part of what we do.
Yeah, the top bit of what's gone wrong, the injury, and explaining that to them and then getting the evidence to tease out the difference, especially if what has happened has left them needing something like care or to move home. It's like working out with your experts exactly what of that they would have needed anyway and what of that they wouldn't have needed. And that's the portion that you claim compensation for.
Yes.
And that's not always easy.
Yeah, no, quite right. I mean, the investigation process is pretty much the same, in whatever area of medicine.
It doesn't matter what
the
sort
injury
of claim
happened, didn't it?
You need those three
of course,
steps.
We're not necessarily always looking at things that have just gone wrong in hospitals, are we?
No. It can be absolutely any setting with a sort of broadly a healthcare setting. dentist, optician, physiotherapist, nurse-led clinic, one of those out-of-hours centres that people are sent to, absolutely anyone. If somebody has treated you or not treated you, if you've been to someone for some sort of clinical, that's why we now say clinical negligence instead of medical negligence, because people were understanding medical negligence to mean doctors and hospitals, whereas of course it's not. It's healthcare professionals in the broadest sense, and really in any setting that they're offering you their advice and services.
Yes, and of course not just NHS, but obviously increasingly there's a lot of healthcare being delivered in the private sector, both through private health insurance and indeed through NHS
using the private health
sector to try and deliver more treatments. So I suppose in short, it's impossible on the day that a client approaches us. It's very difficult to say for sure whether or not they have a claim. But as you said earlier, I think it is possible for us to sort of say, well, yes, we think there is something there that might be worth looking at. And one of the first things we'll do is to get an outline of exactly what has happened from the client, and details of exactly what they think has gone wrong. But yeah, the other point, I guess, is cost, because people are often concerned about whether or not it will cost them to find out whether or not they have a claim. And I think that the great benefit of no-win, no-fee agreements is that it does enable anybody to really have the opportunity to get those questions answered and to have their case investigated.
We don't have to ask clients for a penny, do we? Sort of with a no-win, no-fee agreement, a client doesn't pay you anything. As the claim progresses, they literally pay you nothing. And if they're not successful and don't obtain compensation, they pay nothing. So it costs them nothing, absolutely nothing. And it does terrify people, the thought that they might investigate a claim, end up without a claim and owing their solicitor money for something. But we cover all the costs all the way through.
Exactly. I mean, that would just really be adding insult to injury. And I think that it is, although there may be some lawyers out there who will ask people for money on account to investigate cases. I mean, I think these days, really, with good no-win, no-fee agreements and coupled with insurance, it shouldn't cost anybody a penny to find out
a specialist
whether or not
solicitor
they can
should be able
establish a claim.
to assess, based on what you've said, decide whether the client should be offered a no-win, no-fee agreement, and no client should be asked to pay a penny towards investigating that. They shouldn't be asked to get their records first or anything. Should just be able to do it.
I think people should be assured that there is no need to take a financial risk.
No, none at all.
The way that the funding system works now should enable people to really get their questions answered.
What it was designed to. So if a solicitor is not working within the system, then you want to ask a question as to why they're not able to. No, specialists would be able to do it without any risk.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely right. I suppose another key element in advising somebody whether or not they have a claim is to look at how long ago the treatment in question took place, doesn't it? Yeah. Because when someone's been injured in healthcare, quite often there's quite a long recovery process for them before they even are in a position to consider whether or not they want to think about bringing a claim.
Yeah, definitely.
And so that is one of the first things that we need to advise clients about, isn't it?
Well, I mean, in general, you start with looking at 3 years from when whatever the breach of duty was is your first starting point. But of course, sometimes people don't know immediately that they've even been injured, especially if it's something that wasn't done, or if the injury will take a while to show itself. And then we take 3 years from date of knowledge, which of itself is a bit of a nightmare. Yeah. But
it's not straightforward, is it? Because I suppose if something goes wrong in an operation, that's fairly easy. You've got 3 years usually from the date of that operation, where your injury is quite clear. But of course, then you've got to think about cases like misdiagnosis. I mean, for example, some of the awful cases that we see where cancers have been missed, sometimes for years. And of course, in those sorts of cases, the 3 years doesn't start to run until the diagnosis is made, because of course until that point you don't know.
No idea.
That you've
I
got
know those are
the
awful
injury.
Cases. People coming to you and they've had a cough or something for years. They've had X-rays that they've been told they've been given the all clear and there's nothing wrong. And then 3 years later, things have moved on and it's now in a very different situation. And yes, their time limit has moved on. So although generally people should come and see a solicitor really as soon as they know or think they may have suffered an injury, if they know that even if it's more than 3 years, they should still see a solicitor. The circumstances of their claim may be...
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are ways around the 3 years, but it's not straightforward, is it? I mean, the court always has a discretion to allow claims to be brought outside the time limit. But I would always say to clients, please do not rely on that.
This is the last resort.
Exactly. So it's always worth taking advice, but I'm afraid the advice may be,
sorry,
you're
not.
simply too late.
Of course, that's adults, isn't it?
You're quite right. And I was going to say, I think there is different rules for children and indeed for people who don't have capacity to deal with things themselves. Because for a child, for example, we're looking at...
Well, assuming that when they reach 18, they won't lack capacity. It's weird. We say 3 years from their 18th birthday. I don't know why we can't say it until they're 21, but we don't, do we? It's 3 years from your 18th birthday for a child.
For a child. And for people who don't have capacity, well, theoretically, there's no time limit at all, except, of course, that that evidence will... I guess, be more difficult to deal with the longer you are away or the greater the distance.
Never delay anything because, records can go missing. People can move on who you may need evidence from. No, always come to us as early as possible. And of course, the earlier they come to see a solicitor, the sooner they get the answers they're looking for, whichever way. And if it is positive in that they do have a case, the sooner they actually get their compensation. So there isn't really a reason to delay.
Yes, it's best not to hang around.
No, not at all.
I mean, of course, sometimes the person who's contacting us isn't the person who's been injured.
No.
I mean, that's quite common, isn't it? Because often if somebody has had an awful outcome from their medical treatment, they're in no fit state to be commencing investigations or instructing a solicitor. And that's quite common, isn't it?
Oh, it's very common. You might have partners calling up or parents calling up, or actually adult children calling up to ask whether their family member or loved one might have a claim. They might make the initial inquiry, and then there are instances where the person who's actually been injured lacks capacity or just really lacks the ability and the bandwidth to deal with it, where you will deal with a loved one, and that's very common.
That's true. It's always possible, isn't it, for an individual to nominate another family member to actually deal with the day-to-day administration of the case. Because some people can't, understandably, when you're recovering from a bout of illness or a poor outcome from treatment, it's just one more thing that you don't want to have to deal with. And so it's quite common to be able to just nominate another family member to just deal with those day-to-day things.
Absolutely.
But of course, also any good solicitor really should try to minimise the
amount of stress
so much as possible. I mean, that's our job, to absorb a lot of that stress and to shield the client from it. I mean, there's no getting around it that it is pursuing a case can be stressful.
It is.
You do have to sort of relive the events probably repeatedly, which I know some people do find very difficult. But as I say, a good solicitor will help you to manage that and hopefully shield you from the worst of it.
Other things as well, if they only want contact one way, we can do that, sort of only emails or only letters because they don't want to see emails coming. I mean, clients can ask for whatever they want, whatever they think will help them. We can manage that whatever way they want.
It's getting the balance right, isn't it? Because I think it's very important for the client to be involved in the case. I mean, I think it's not possible just to hand it over to a solicitor and say, call me when you've got the money. It's really important for the client to be involved in the process and to understand what's going on. And I think to feel like they're in control of it, because I think that's another. I've seen this very often in clients that we have acted for. If you're injured as part of your healthcare, it can feel like an enormous breach of trust, and people can feel very vulnerable. And I hate the word victim, but people, it's used quite commonly in these circumstances. But I think it can be quite destructive, and I think that to help people get over things, it can be. A good solicitor can sort of help them feel, I'm not a victim. This has happened to me and it's terrible.
I'm taking some control back.
I can do something about this. I can take control. I can understand what's happened and I can
make my own decisions back. And then I can get my compensation and move on.
And I think that's a great outcome that we can.
Job.
It's probably really one of the most satisfying things about what we do, isn't it? Is actually making people feel that they can overcome what's happened to them and not be defined by it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise our job, you could see it in some ways. And I have had people ask me, do I find it depressing? Yes, but no, because they come to you as they are and with whatever's happened to them. But actually it's great then if you can get them an answer, even if they don't have a claim and they don't get compensation, you get them an answer and that provides them some sort of relief and outcome, or you can get them compensation. So it's whichever way you look at it. I love my job.
What about the complaints process, Tami? I mean, what do you feel about that? I mean, I think, I know that some solicitors would always prefer the client to have gone through the complaints process before they actually come to consult a solicitor. I mean, I'm in two minds about this. I mean, I think sometimes it can be helpful, particularly when the patient has very little knowledge about what went wrong and why it went wrong.
Yeah. If it's surgery and they just come out the other end and it didn't go wrong and but I hesitate to say they can't always be trusted. Sometimes by the end of the case, it becomes clear that whatever the outcome in the serious untoward incident report or whatever was absolutely wrong and inaccurate, and it can take you down the wrong path. In other instances, it is exactly what we would do, but they won't rely, defendant trust won't allow you to rely on it. They still make you do all the work. So if they've done it, great, we'll work with whatever's there. But why would you delay your own investigation in order to let someone else carry out what may end up being a self-serving investigation, what may end up being an inaccurate investigation, which you then can't rely on as of right in any event. So
yes, it's possibly helpful in some circumstances, but by no means mandatory.
It's not necessary.
We certainly wouldn't require a client to have,
it would just delay things, and we've just said to people, don't delay coming to see us. It's delay things unnecessarily.
Some people find it very difficult to approach a solicitor, don't they? I mean, I guess solicitors are a bit of a distress purchase, aren't they, really? Most people only see a solicitor when they're at a particularly stressful time in their lives. And I know that people can find it a bit daunting. But I think that a good solicitor will try to make it as easy as possible.
Recognises that.
I think these days most solicitors are fairly approachable.
Yeah, I think most are.
And as you said, you can contact by email, by telephone, and these days also increasingly by video call, which can be very helpful. I think it's important that the client does actually get to meet their solicitor, don't you?
And of course, and has their own solicitor and knows who is working on their behalf. And as you say, video calls are great because oftentimes clients can't find time to get into the office. Maybe they work full time, they have caring obligations or whatever, or children who are at school. But if you can do a video call, most people can fit in half an hour somewhere on a video call. And just the face-to-face, as opposed to a telephone call, it helps me see who my client is. And of course, if my client is not that person, it's their mother, their daughter, or somebody else, you can meet that person as well and know who you're really acting for. And they can see you, the person who is going to be writing to them, sending them emails, calling them, doing everything on their behalf. Just helps face-to-face helps to build up trust.
And I think in terms of getting an answer to that question, do I have a claim? I mean, no solicitor is going to be able to answer that question definitively right at the outset. No. Because a full investigation will have to be done, which includes getting medical records, getting independent expert reports before the claim, before the answers can finally be given. But I think that certainly within a few days, a client should know whether or not there's a claim that's worth investigating. And most good lawyers, you'll know at the outset if it's absolutely hopeless. For example, it's years out of date or that sort of thing. Then it will be clear.
Or you just have come to know through your experience that that's the sort of complication that happens within that type of surgery, and you're unlikely to succeed.
Yeah. So I think a sort of a provisional answer can be given very quickly.
Yeah. But it's important to say no when you need to say no as well, because otherwise you drag people through this stressful process for absolutely no reason at all.
Yes, sometimes the right no is better than the wrong yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks very much, Tami. That's we've covered a lot of things today, and I'm sure we'll have to come back to some of these in later episodes. But thanks for being here today.
Oh, thank you.